Hello and welcome. Today we're covering Dr. No, the first James Bond movie as part of our Bond vs. Bond, the First Outings series. This inaugural season of the channel was voted on by you, the viewers, so thank you. We will be covering the first outings of the first 5 Bond actors, starting with Sean. Some of you may be asking, why only the first 5? Why not Daniel Craig? Because we covered Casino Royale already. You can find that video in the Bond vs. Bond playlist, along with videos on Moonraker and Spectre. But back to Dr. No. What a magnificent movie. Can we just appreciate what this movie has done? It is often overshadowed by its more popular siblings, especially From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, but it was Dr. No that gave us the gun barrel sequence, Dr. No that gave us the James Bond theme, Dr. No that gave us Bond's one-liners, Dr. No that gave us Bond's sophistication and style, Dr. No that gave us the incredible Ken Adams sets, and Dr. No that gave us all that James Bond means on the big screen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Some of you might not know what all that is. Maybe you've never even seen a Bond movie. I encourage you to change that, but in the meantime, I'll do my best to make you feel welcome here too. No major spoilers in this video. Dr. No was released in 1962 and is based on the 6th James Bond novel. They would have started with the first novel, but somebody else had the rights back then. 2 British operatives are killed in Jamaica and Bond is sent to investigate. What does it have to do with the assignment the 2 operatives were on? What does it have to do with a mysterious man named Dr. No? The movie had a modest budget, but a very enthusiastic production team. And it's the enthusiastic production team that I want to talk about most, along with Sean Connery, of course. But first, a little more background. Producer Albert Broccoli, or Cubby Broccoli, had the money to turn the Bond books into movies and wanted to very much, but he didn't have the rights. Producer Harry Saltzman had the rights, but didn't have the money. A partnership was formed, and United Artists agreed to finance them. Everybody was on board, and everybody was on the same page. Remarkably, there was no interference from United Artists. The head of United Artists at the time said that from the moment he met Saltzman and Broccoli, he knew they wanted to make the movie exactly as he imagined it should be. And he also said he didn't let them out of the room until the contract was signed. And once it was signed, he knew he didn't have to micromanage them. I don't know if this was common back then, but today this level of trust from executives is unheard of. A couple higher profile directors passed on the project and Terence Young was brought aboard. He had worked with Broccoli before and had moderate experience and a lot of style, which the producers wanted him to bring to James Bond. And as we discuss the various creative decisions that were made, I think you'll come to see that Terence Young was a very key figure in the shaping of Dr. No and the birth of James Bond on the big screen. This perfect storm of creative decisions had an epicenter in Terence Young. Someone to foster it all and create a space where they all feel comfortable taking risks and pushing boundaries. Right at the front of every Bond movie, up to Casino Royale, is the gun barrel sequence. Developed by Maurice Binder as a stylish way to kick the movie off, it's evolved over the years, but remains a feature of the franchise to this day. It wasn't entirely unusual for a movie to start with fun opening titles in the 60s, but this would have stood out with its violent nature and simulated blood running down the screen. It's exactly the sort of push and risk that Terence Young was brought on to make, and exactly the stylistic flair the producers wanted. Maurice Binder would go on to do the opening titles for 16 James Bond films. After the gunshot, the orchestra blares the James Bond theme written by Monty Norman and arranged by John Barry. We're less than a minute in, and Dr. No has already given us 2 icons of cinema. Monty Norman was originally hired and composed all the original music for Dr. No, including 2 Jamaican-style pop songs featured in the movie. But when it came time for a theme for James Bond himself, the producers were a little let down by Norman's work and turned to John Barry. Norman had a piece of music in mind for the theme that he had written for something else, and John Barry arranged the heck out of that thing and turned it into the theme we all know today. As if the gun barrel sequence wasn't stylish enough on its own. The theme elevates it right into movie history. John Barry would go on to score 11 James Bond films. Then the movie starts, of course, but before we get to Sean as Bond, there's one key creative decision from Terence Young that I have to mention. The literary Bond is different from the movie Bond. The literary Bond is not suave, sophisticated, or even witty. He's brutal, cold, and emotionally damaged. Not unlike Daniel Craig's Bond in his first two movies. As another example, people say Timothy Dalton in License to Kill was the closest the movies ever came to the literary Bond. James Bond author Ian Fleming's writing, however, was known for elegance, sophistication, and wit. And during pre-production on Dr. No, Terence Young made the decision to imbue those attributes of the books onto James Bond himself. I can't go over all the ways Dr. No gave birth to what we know as James Bond, but this is a big one. It's another example of the kind of risk he was brought in to take. Terence Young was himself a very, very stylish man, we are to understand. So I imagine it wasn't that great of a creative leap for him, but it was also brilliant. These are the kind of changes you have to make to adapt a novel. The voice and energy of the author are essential characteristics of the book that do not directly translate. So you have to find creative ways to capture the spirit of the thing. I talked about this in my Eddie the Eagle video. Of course, I watched all the bonus features and listened to all the commentary to prepare for this video, and I'm trying to think how I can get this important detail across. Terence Young's personal style as a man and as a director was conveyed into Dr. No in three ways. First, what I just described in the elegance and sophistication of the writing being given to James Bond as character attributes. Second, there is a fantasy lens applied to the whole production. Everything feels just a little bit larger than life, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, borderline whimsical. This is especially felt in the one-liners and the sets. We'll get to that later. And third, Terence Young personally took a young Scottish actor under his wing and taught Sean Connery how to be James Bond. And it's high time we talk about Sean. As much as the producers would have loved to cast someone like Cary Grant to play Bond, it was more important that they get someone into a multi-picture deal. And with the budget they had, that meant it had to be a no-name actor. Enter Sean Connery. Scottish, ex-Navy, bodybuilder turned actor, rough around the edges, and only a handful of credits to his name, most notably a headline role in 1959's Darby O'Gill and the Little People. For an Irish character, he sure sounded Scottish to me. Did I watch it to prepare for this video? Yes. Did I gain any special insights from doing so? No. Except that you should not mess with leprechauns. Sean looked right, and the producers always remarked that they liked the way he moved. As a former bodybuilder, he had a physical confidence and air about him they felt was right for the character. And Terence Young did the rest. He taught Sean all the social graces. They say he introduced Sean to his own tailor, his own hairstylist, and so on. By all accounts, Terence Young lived the lifestyle of James Bond in real life and gave that refinement to Sean to portray on screen. Without Terence Young, James Bond would not be a connoisseur of fine wines, would not have a penchant for caviar, and would not be known as the world's most suave super spy. After Terence Young prepared Sean for the role, Dr. No introduced Connery's Bond to audiences all over the world, and the rest is history. He is still considered to be the best Bond actor by many Bond fans. My personal favorite is Daniel Craig, just because he got me into the series. But if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, I have to admit Sean might be the best. One of the wonderful things about James Bond fandom, by the way, is the astonishing level of variety among these sorts of opinions. Some opinions certainly hold the majority, but it is never difficult to find other ones. Most Bond fans would say Connery or Moore are the best. My favorite is Craig. But it wouldn't be hard to find someone who says George Lazenby is best, even though he only did one. If you can think of a James Bond opinion, you can find someone who swears by it. But back to Sean Connery, we have to talk about his one-liners. The whole idea of the quips after dispatching an enemy was Terence Young's idea. It was for the censors. He thought it would help it go down easier with all the violence in the movie, and add to that tongue-in-cheek quality we've been talking about. Connery himself claims that the James Bond films essentially invented one-liners.
That kind of one-line humor that we really initiated in there is all over.
That's a big claim, and I haven't really looked into it. I can't disprove it. It could be true. It's fun to say it's true. If you can disprove it, let me know in the comments. This tongue-in-cheek quality I keep saying Terence Young was after is not my way of describing it, by the way. It was Ken Adam who described the director's approach that way.
So he treated the story with a certain amount of tongue in the cheek.
For those of you who don't know, Ken Adam is maybe the most legendary production designer in history. The production designer designs the sets. And it's actually Sir Ken Adam because he was knighted. I don't know of any other production designers that were knighted for their work. He built the sets for Dr. No at Pinewood Studios in England while everybody else was off in Jamaica for 12 weeks. He also said that he might not have gotten away with such over-the-top sets if Terence Young wasn't halfway around the world. But when everybody did come back, the director loved the sets. It fit his tongue-in-cheek attitude perfectly, and audiences loved it just as much. Fantastic sets are just as important to the Bond formula now as fast cars or exotic locations. And for those of you who haven't seen all the Bond films, the Ken Adam sets are a real treat. He would go on to work on 7 James Bond films. I've barely scratched the surface here of Dr. No's firsts. Bond James Bond started here. Shaken Not Stirred started here. Bernard Lee as M would go on to do 11 Bond films. Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny would go on to do 14 Bond films. It was one of the first movies to show a man and a woman in the same bed. I can't say I'm especially proud of it for that. And Honey Rider walking out of the ocean was just about the most sensational thing in 1962. It might not seem like much today, but a long, single shot that is unapologetically focused on the female figure like that was considered very brash at the time. And then there's Bond shooting an unarmed man in one scene. The Bond from the books had to be softened up for the movies, but some of it had to make it through. Terence Young had to talk to the censors personally about that one. So many people did such amazing work on this movie, and I do not want to give the impression that it was all Terence Young. I just wanted to highlight him because people always want to talk about Sean or the producers when they talk about Dr. No. But to close now, I'll put it this way. If Dr. No is a freshly baked cookie, then Terence Young is the warm, gooey center. I don't think I can make myself any clearer. Dr. No is an awesome detective adventure story, and if you haven't seen it, I think you should go watch it as soon as you can. End of review. Before we get to Bond vs. Bond, I must give Dr. No a rating, and I give it 8 out of 10 commandments. Now to Bond vs. Bond. That puts Sean straight into the lead with 8, Daniel Craig in second with 7.5, and Roger bringing up the rear with 7. Be sure to tune in next time for George Lazenby's first and final Bond film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This Bond vs. Bond season is going to be a lot of fun, and remember, the topic of each season is decided by your vote. So if you have ideas for next season, put them in the comments. With enough submissions from you guys, I want to put at least one viewer-submitted vote option for each season, so don't be shy. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.